Welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, July 26th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the media days that unfolded this week. We'll first get into the Big Ten because that absolutely dominated headlines throughout the week, and then we'll get into the ACC, which absolutely had tons to unfold as well. So we'll get into both of those to start the show. Then we'll get into the season coming up and how it is one of the most unpredictable seasons that I definitely have ever seen, and frankly, I think it's one in a very, very long time that I just cannot get a beat on. So I'll kind of break down exactly what I mean, how it goes through literally every single part of this sport this upcoming year. Then we'll continue on with the biggest four-game stretches for some of the title contenders out there. We have 4 more teams for you. Likely we'll do it on this segment, and then we'll get into hot takes for contenders. We'll do the SEC today, and that will likely wrap that up. Maybe we'll do a group of 5 segment here pretty soon, but as of right now, we're going to lean into the SEC and then just probably finish it out. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of, I apologize for that. Have these all up from yesterday. There we go. If you would like to tip or donate and possibly ask a question on here, you can get your question on the screen, which is obviously a huge help to all of us here, but also to you. If you want to kind of have an interactive experience here, you can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us, but to you guys. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always good for the both of us. But again, that's gsmcpodcast.net if you'd like to use that. But let's jump into the Big Ten Media Day reactions, and there was a ton of stuff that unfolded over the last couple of days in Indianapolis. There was tons of behind-the-scenes news, a couple of little tidbits about realignment that we'll get to in a little bit, but the main thing that I noticed throughout this week is Ohio State's coming forward all this year. They have no issue saying that very, very out loud, very out front. And one of the people kind of leading that charge was Ryan Day in some respects. Ryan Day was a little bit different tenor than I've seen in the past, just a little bit more kind of the same reserved self, but also spoke with a little bit of humility but confidence about this upcoming season, talked about some of the different mistakes that he's made in the first couple of years and how he's kind of gone about fixing those this upcoming year, bringing in guys like Chip Kelly, getting the right players in the right seats, as he's put it. So there's a ton of different things that he's putting into this year, and he just has this, quiet confidence about him that I think he understands what this year is going to mean to so many different Ohio State fans, and he's coming into it with about as much energy and intensity as you could possibly want if you're an Ohio State fan. And then you had Denzel Burke also there. He said very plain and simple, he did not come back for anything but a national title. And I've been someone that has tried to keep myself from saying it is title or bust for this team. I tend to believe that regardless of if you get to the semifinals of a playoff, everything kind of is tossed up in the air at that point. So it's hard for me to say that this has to be a title or bust season, but all the players are saying it, so it's hard for me to necessarily argue with them either. It'll be really, really interesting to see all of this unfold. Obviously, none of it matters until you kick off on August 31st and get things going, but it really feels like it's going to be a very fun year out there. Also, another little tidbit from it was it sounds like they used about $2 million on their NIL budget. That was kind of a rumor, so we don't really know what the exact number is. If that's the number, flex the muscles that you have. It's the game that everyone's playing at this very moment, and if Ohio State's playing it better than everyone else, then so be it. But the other person that made a ton of headlines was Lincoln Riley. He had a number of quotes that got the Twitter world a little bit on fire. There's no two ways about that. But the first one, he was talking about Saban and Bama and how they were scheduling in the past to win titles, not to, play the toughest games or to schedule for their fans, as he put it. He schedules to win championships. And frankly, I don't necessarily agree because no matter who you play in the out-of-conference, if you were playing in the SEC West over the last 10 years, you were playing a tough schedule. So that's kind of beside the point. He was talking about the Notre Dame game when he discussed this, and gets me a little bit worried about him not necessarily being as committed to that game as he possibly should, and one game that I absolutely want to keep in the fold, but at the end of the day, if the head coach of one of the bigger teams is not that interested in playing it, there's a real reality where it's taken off the schedule, and I would absolutely hate to see that. But as he said, if you need to schedule some weaker teams to make it into that playoff and possibly win a national title and be healthy while you're doing it, It's hard to argue with that. He also made a comment that really got people up in arms about USC catching up, as he put it, in pretty much every category, from NIL to facilities to talent level, everything in between that he's had to deal with since he showed up. Frankly, he's absolutely right. There's no two ways that USC is not where it should be, and it definitely wasn't when he walked in where it should be in the world of NIL, in the world of facilities, and just putting into this program what should be put into this program. What can be put into this program has not remotely been put in. So I think he's absolutely right about that. It was a little weird and definitely got some Oklahoma fans mad, because that was one of the big reasons he decided to move on to SC, or at least that was one of the big reasons that he said. So I definitely think it's one of those things that he is technically right. If this USC program is operating at the best possible ability, if they are firing on absolutely all cylinders, there's not going to be a lot of teams and programs that are going to be in better shape than them. They are missing on just about every cylinder right about now. And that's the real problem here. And some of it is outside of Lincoln Riley's control. Some of it is above his head. So he's going to have to kind of do his best to make it all work. But as of right now, it just seems like USC is not making the waves that you want them to make. They're not making the progress that you want them to make year over year. And I made a pick yesterday that I think they're going to have a top 70 defense. I'm getting a little bit more worried about that as we get closer to the season and as I hear more and more about what people really think about this defense going into this year. But we'll obviously see how that unfolds. I'm going to hold by that, but it'll definitely be interesting to watch that. Sherrone Moore and Michigan were also there, although I'm sure you didn't necessarily hear too much about the reigning national champions because it was a relatively quiet week for the Michigan Wolverines. Not necessarily anything too crazy. One of the big things that did happen, that did come out, was Kirk Campbell and Sherrone Moore were talking about their starting quarterback situation and who's going to be the guy under center at the very first snap of the season. Sherrone Moore had a quote that just said, the things he's looking for in his starting quarterback: he will take care of the football, he will be a team player, he'll be a playmaker, and he'll put winning first. And then Kirk Campbell was talking about Alex Orji and his chances to be in this offense, whether it's the quarterback or with different in different facets, and he said he is one of the best 11 players on the offense. There's no two ways about that. Now, is he the best quarterback? We'll find out, and that doesn't necessarily bode confidence for me to Alex Orji being the first week starter. If I'm being totally honest, I tend to believe that it might just be Jack Tuttle out there, and I think it's kind of just, you're going to have a good run game. You do have Donovan Edwards, you do have Khalil Mullings, you can use Alex Orji when you want in some different packages, but at the end of the day, the J.J. McCarthy type quarterback is the one that absolutely is going to be the dude. He is absolutely the guy that is going to be someone that totally hits every spot that is a little bit more of that J.J. McCarthy type player, and that was the one that got you that far. So it's really hard for me to say that this is the wrong decision or anything like that. Obviously, it'll unfold much more during fall camp, but as of right now, if I was to bet who's going to be the starter when they trot out there in week one, I would go towards Jack Tuttle, that's for sure. Congratulations, Anthony. That's absolutely awesome. Very, very happy for y'all. But let's move on to Oregon here, and let's talk about this team just oozes confidence, and not everyone likes it, and not everyone, I've seen a number of people say they don't love the way that they don't love Dan Lanning. Let's just leave it at that. But Dan Lanning absolutely loves this university and is very, very forthright about that. He says everything they do is a little bit different, and he's absolutely right about that. Everything up there in Eugene is just a little bit different than it has been in past years. And he has the roster and everything to do exactly what he wants to do this season, and they came in with that energy. They know that this is a big-time conference. They know that this is a really tough conference they're walking into, but they are not scared at all. And obviously there were a ton of questions around how they've used NIL and recruiting and that type of thing. They did just lose a big-time recruit, JioSaavn Sharma, to Texas, so a little bit of a blip there for Oregon recruiting, but overall, overall, he's just been doing an incredible job, and people have pointed to NIL a lot as the reasoning for that, and frankly, he just said, if you're not using it, then you're losing, and he's absolutely right. So Oregon has the muscles. They absolutely should be flexing them. If you have the guy that founded Nike in your alumni base and you're not using NIL, you're doing something wrong. That's just the plain truth. Dylan Gabriel was also there, and he talked about his decision to jump over to Oregon. Basically just said it was the easiest decision he's ever made, because when you're walking into a Will Stein offense with Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart and all of the guys around him, it's a very easy decision. Let's just be totally honest with you. And I think him and Oklahoma were kind of moving in separate directions, especially with Jeff Lebby walking out the door. It just felt like that was not going to be, partnership going forward. I think Jackson Arnold deserved to get his shot, and it worked out really best for everyone. So that's definitely something that's going to be huge for them. And frankly, Dylan Gabriel is going to do just incredible work in this offense. I think it fits like an absolute glove, and I think he's one of those guys that maybe it's not an upgrade from Bo Nix. I tend to believe it's a little bit of a downgrade, but if it is, it's not by far by any means. And then you obviously saw the inflatable duck rolling down the White River down over there in Indianapolis, and it's just the PR team. This Oregon PR team absolutely works harder than anyone else, and you will see it plenty in the Big Ten, I can promise you that. And then one of the other big-time conversations was how many teams can actually win this conference. I know we talk about all the teams like Nebraska and Iowa and Wisconsin that are really, really fun teams, but can they win a Big Ten title? And I tend to believe no. And the thing is, you could cut it down even further than that if you really wanted to, because when you look at Ohio State and Oregon, it is really hard to find holes. Now, I can poke holes in Oregon a little bit. I can definitely worry about some of the defensive line stuff really working out the way they want to. Bringing in some of those transfers is a little bit worrisome. Ohio State, Will Howard, I guess, is your biggest question. But if your biggest question is a guy that knocked off a team that went to the title 2 years ago in a Big 12 title, I'm not necessarily worried about that guy. So I think that's more than fine. I just think there's a reality where there's only two teams in this conference that can really win a title. Now, Michigan and Penn State are absolutely sitting there and can make noise in this conversation, but as I see it, there are two teams that are a sort of head and shoulder. I don't necessarily want to say head and shoulders, but they are tier 1. And tier 2, I would say, is Michigan and Penn State, although you could easily make the argument that they're all tier 1 and there's no tier 2 teams in the Big Ten. And then you get down to USC, Nebraska, and all the other teams, and they're more tier 3 teams. So it's a kind of a weird diatribe in this conference where it's really hard to figure out what the pecking order is. Not necessarily at the very top, not necessarily figuring out, going into this year, I think we can all agree it goes Ohio State, Oregon, and then you can go Michigan or Penn State. I kind of lean Penn State, but we can debate on that pretty much all day. But at the end of the day, I do think there are some teams behind them that could blow this entire thing up. Let's say Nebraska plays really good football. Let's say Dylan Raiola comes and absolutely hits the ground running, which is frankly maybe a little bit unfair to him to expect of him, but the reality is it's still a chance. And then what if Iowa puts together a good offense this upcoming year? Both are dangerous teams and could totally turn this thing on its head. So if you were to ask me between, if 7 teams can win it or if 2 teams can win it, I'd lean towards the 2. But at the end of the day, there are a ton of teams that could make noise and kind of throw a wrench into that. That's for sure. But we have some other things here. Deshaun Foster had a relatively awkward opening statement. Not relatively, a very awkward opening statement. But overall, I get it doesn't inspire confidence by any means, but he was awesome in interviews throughout the week, and frankly, his job is to coach football, not to do public speaking. So I'm not necessarily too mad about that. I think it doesn't necessarily tell you that UCLA is going to be terrible under Deshaun Foster. It's just a little bit of an awkward moment. Jonathan Smith absolutely turned heads. It felt like absolutely everyone there was talking about how incredible this coach is and how he's going to build something in that program up in East Lansing that hasn't been there in the last couple of years and could be really dangerous. So it might not be 2024. In fact, it's definitely not going to be 2024 for the Spartans, but 2025 is coming really quick, and they absolutely can make some noise there. No big words on expansion. There were a couple of things kicked around in the ACC that could affect the Big Ten, but overall, nothing too crazy. And then Penn State has some confidence on offense. There's no two ways about that. Definitely something that will be huge for them, but it seems like James Franklin feels really good about Andy Kotelnicki. And then on top of that, you had a little quote from Matt Rule that was a little bit crazy about the Big Ten being the NFL of college football. If you want to go look at the number of players drafted from the SEC over the last 18 years, they're more than welcome, but that would be the NFL of college football. But I don't necessarily disagree with him. I do think 4 teams should get into the playoff every single year from that conference, or at least most years from that conference, and they're absolutely one of the class conferences in the country. But if you're calling it the SEC of college football, I just can't quite agree with that. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to get to the ACC Media Days. Not quite as much to break down from that one, but still plenty from Charlotte this past week, so we'll break it down right after this.